There's a story that's told many years ago. I had the privilege of hearing a minister that was a missionary to Africa. He was home raising funds to go back to Africa. And he was preaching in a church, and he had preached there all week. And on the final night, there was a man that came up to him at the close of the service. This is the first time I've ever come into a church house in my whole life. Said, my family's been coming telling me about this preacher from Africa that was here. That's you. And said, I came to hear you. Said, what's strange is the Lord told me to give you my Jeep. And the missionary was humbled by that. At the close of the service, he went home to the parsonage. And at the parsonage, he told the pastor, he said, a man in the church tonight told me that he wanted to give me his Jeep. He said, that is the worst thing I've ever had a visiting missionary do in my entire ministry. I can't believe you would accept that Jeep from that man. He's the poorest man that we have in the church. He's a sharecropper. His family comes. He's never come before. He said, well, I'll tell you what, Pastor. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. He said, he told me he was coming at 9 in the morning. I'm going to leave at 4:30. Then you will deal with it. Because I didn't have anything to do with it. I did need a Jeep, but I didn't need a Jeep like this. He said, you deal with it. So at 4:30 in the morning, he and his wife got up to leave the house. And when they got up to leave the house and walked out the front door, guess who was sitting on the front porch? He said, God told me you were going to try to leave and get out of town without me being here, so I've come here and spent the whole night. He said, I went and I paid, to have the title changed over into your name, and it's your Jeep. You can take it with you. Well, it was really caused a commotion. It was early in the morning, so he and his wife both were driving. She took that car. He drove behind in the Jeep all the way down to Florida. They got to Florida, and they were packing up, getting ready to send all of their stuff over to Africa. And so they put all of their things that they needed for 5 years. And so what they did, they were on their way to get a last few things, and they pulled up at a red light, and there was a dealership there, a Jeep dealership, and there was a red Jeep sitting there. And she looked over at him. She said, there's our Jeep right there. That's the Jeep that God wants us to have. That's our Jeep. He said, well, you've lost your mind. We can't afford that Jeep. I'm telling you, pull over. It's our Jeep. So pulled over to the side of the curb. And he got out. And he walked up around the Jeep. And all of a sudden, here comes a car dealer, a car salesman. He comes up to him and he said, oh, man, we can make you a deal on this. Kaiser Fraser, that tells you how long ago it was. Kaiser Fraser came out with this red Jeep. Think that it's the most beautiful Jeep in the world. It's so ugly in the eyes of the purchasing public. Nobody will buy this. We can make you a really good deal. He said, well, I'll tell you what. I'll make you a really good deal. I'll give you my Jeep and $384 for that Jeep. And he said, well, I'm telling you right now, that's not ever going to happen. He said, look, I'm a missionary, and I need that Jeep to take with me to Africa. That beautiful red Jeep. I need that. He said, look, I'll give you $384 in this Jeep for it. He said, listen, if your name was Peter, you're not going to get that Jeep for $384 and this old beat-up Jeep you have. He said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, you go tell the management about it and tell them that I'll give them $384 and my old Jeep, and I need that Jeep to go to Africa. He just absolutely was just infuriated and began to mock the missionary. He said, I'll be back in an hour. I've got to go down to Kmart and purchase some last-minute things that I need. He said, I'm telling you, might as well forget it. He said, I'll be back in an hour. So he came back in an hour, and he pulled up on the curb. His wife said, you pull into that parking lot. You pull right up to that front door where I don't have to get all of the stuff out of this Jeep and put it in that other Jeep. I mean, you make it easy on us, they're going to give us this Jeep. He said, woman, you have lost your mind. She said, I'm telling you, that's our Jeep. And so he pulled in there just embarrassed, and he said, okay, let's make the deal. He said, mister, you've lost your mind. He said, if you could float from cloud to cloud, there is no way that you're going to get this Jeep for that Jeep in $384. And so he was disillusioned, disappointment. His wife was discouraged. Have many of you ever tell your wife no when she thought she had heard from God? That's not fun. And so he's getting ready to leave, and a big semi pulls up behind him, flatbed, and pulls up right behind him, blocks him in. And the man was delivering a sign. And when he stopped right behind him and blocked him in. He said, I've been trying to find this place for hours. The traffic is so bad, I couldn't find this place. And he said, now I've found it. He said, would you please not have me move? I've got other signs to put up. It'll only take me 20 minutes to get this done. I've got the lift. All we have to do is just lift it up and screw the nuts in there, and we'll be out of here in 20 minutes. And so the missionary just felt like this was another, test of his patience and of his peace, and he consented. He said, okay, that's fine. We'll stay right here. And he said to him, I tell you what. He said, I'll wait here. Maybe that'll give him time to think this over. He's a preacher of the gospel. He's a missionary going to Africa. You give him that Jeep. You take the $384 and you take that Jeep. And so he came out and he said, shaking his head like this, and he said, well, he's saying no before he even gets here. And he was shaking his head because he couldn't believe that his owner of that dealership had told him to give him that Jeep. He was totally dumbfounded. So they take this Jeep and they load it up. They put it on the ship. They send it to Africa. And they go over to Africa. They preach the gospel. They use the Jeep. And then God spoke to him.